Hey everyone, this is Mikkel Plain. You are listening to The Revenue Formula. In today's episode, we discuss 4 simple reasons you're not getting any expansion, and of course, what you can do about it. Enjoy. So, how does it feel like to have a weak co-founder and CEO?
It feels great.
So Tony is out sick with the man flu. Definitely something been going around. And I was like, well, you know what? This is my shot to get someone way smarter, way funnier, and also, quite frankly, someone who has way more hair on this show.
Happy to step in.
So we have Olafur with us. You're a co-founder also of Growblocks, and you're our COO.
Correct.
Taking care of all our operations, whatever that means, making sure everything runs.
And more importantly, I take care of our customer base.
Yeah. And you're the one I go to when there's no more candy bars or whatever.
Exactly.
And then there's a big sigh. And it's just like, well, you have a credit card. Go down and get some.
Exactly.
Go down and get some. Solve the problems yourself.
Founder mentality, right?
So actually also another funny thing, by the way, yesterday was my son's first day of school. First day of school. And today I then dropped him off at school. And he's just like so ready. He's like strutting down the hall. You know, like how some people do like the gun with the hands and do a wing. It was like that vibe. And one of the other kids, one of his friends spots him and he just walks over. And this kid, by the way, he has a bandana on just to set the stage. And my son goes, "Hey, August, bro." And then they just hug. And I was just like, oh no, this is like...
They're not dated yet. They don't know what school is. So,
No, that's true. But also just all the lingo and terms they pick up is just, you can just feel there's some things as a parent where you're like, you know what? I really like to be able to open up my laptop, delete that word from your vocabulary.
You definitely don't want bro culture at 6 years old, right?
No. And he's also like, let's go. And I'm like, have you been watching Corporate Bro or what's going on here?
He's been listening to a podcast.
Well, he is occasionally saying like, subscribe. So that's kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
So I don't know, by the way, how we're going to segue from that into the subject, though. That's going to be a bit tricky. It's usually befalls on me. Yeah. It's a heavy burden, you know. So I don't know. I mean, he's growing a lot. He's expanding his friend circle, his knowledge. And today we're going to talk a bit about expansion.
Yeah.
And I guess it's pretty key because we kind of talked about it before hitting record. You said, hey, what is everyone is struggling? And I was like, well, you know, it's the win rates are down, ACVs are down, sales cycles are longer. And you're like, oh yeah, like new biz is shit. Yeah, exactly. But that's not what we're going to talk about.
Yeah. No.
So we're going to talk a bit about expansion. And I found a couple of benchmarks as well, just to kind of, kick us in the right direction here. So according to OpenView, if you're 5 million AR or north of that, at least 40% of your new AR that you take home should come from existing customers. So if you have a challenge in hitting your target, especially now if, planning season and everything, there's another side to look at of the business, which is your customers. And I think Winning by Design, I saw they had this saying that actually the majority of your revenue will come after the initial sale. Mm-hmm. So I just wanted to hear maybe from you also. You've operated as COO at a couple of other companies as well. Mm-hmm. You've probably had, your fair share of challenges, strategic items on expansion. Why is it so important?
Why is expansion important?
Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, the reason why you're focusing on expansion as a business is because, number one, it signals that your product is good and it's working and people want to buy more of it. So it's a good signal to your investors and to your, company that you're actually building the right thing. But at the end of the day, the reason for it is actually that if you just look at CAC payback as a function of your company and where can you be investing dollars, typically you will be doing 12 to 18 month CAC payback on new biz. That's typically sort of the numbers that we're seeing. The average now, I think, is around 16 to 18 or so. But within that, there's sort of a math equation that also happened, which is that you also have a CAC payback on your upsell dollars. And typically your CAC or customer acquisition cost or dollar acquisition cost, if you will, is actually a fourth
of new biz.
Of new biz.
Wow.
And why is that? well, it's still an AM selling it and all of that jazz. But it's actually the reason for that is that, well, number one, you don't have the marketing cost. You don't have the SDR cost. You don't have a ton of the stuff that you otherwise need. So the sourcing cost can be completely removed. And the sourcing cost in sort of good companies is typically half of your CAC payback. So if you can take out that out of the equation, you end up with a much more efficient dollar acquisition cost than you do on new business. So if you can do proportionally more dollars on existing business than you otherwise will on new business, that just means that your average dollar acquisition cost is actually going to be lowered composition-wise. And that's actually why you want to do it.
So actually, I think that's super interesting because right now, I'll bet you, and maybe you can provide some color to that, but a lot of folks, they're looking into a new year, which is inherently going to be difficult to plan because everything is just shifting constantly. And efficiency is still going to be a priority. But if you can lower your, new dollar acquisition by actually bringing in more expansion, you're going to be way more efficient, which I think is actually I think inherently people know and understand that, it's easier to sell more to an existing customer. But then I also have a hunch that few then actually proceed to then prioritize it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There are sort of two main issues that I've seen on the acquisition of existing base dollars, if you will, which is that either A, you're not investing enough in it. So basically you might have a CS team and you ask them to upsell and kind of do that alongside their normal job and you don't have a dedicated function. You might then allow your AEs to jump in, haphazardly whenever they get the signal from the SDR to then, close business on the existing customer base. But typically people will have one focus or the other. It's going to be an AE working on new business deals, or there will be, an AM working on, bringing in upsell dollars. And then on the other hand, what I also see is that a lot of companies, they actually look at the acquisition of an AM as a function of revenue from the existing base. So they say, well, if I bring in 3 account managers and I give them a $1 million in ARR target each, I should be expecting that they will roughly do 90% of that, and then we'll bring in, $2.5 million in upsell dollars next year. But actually their ability to hit their numbers is actually not a function of how many account managers you have. It doesn't scale with the amount of account managers you have. You actually need to right size your account management team to the expected dollars you can extract from the base that you have.
Yeah.
And it's a very, very simple exercise. You should basically go back 12 months, see how many upsell dollars did you have against the base 12 months ago. Today, you're going to have a new base, and therefore a base that, you can now calculate what should you be expecting over the next 12 months to be extracting from that. And if that number is, 10% on a 10 million ARR base, then you can hire one account manager and give him $1 million in target. And then that's going to be that's going to be the structure, right?
I also think if you have this scenario where you think it's just like with account executives, more AEs equals more revenue. It's just wrong. The math doesn't support it. If you have that same approach with the AM, you're probably going to exhibit some of the behavior I've experienced on the receiving end as a customer, that all of a sudden you get an email from someone you've never heard of before wanting to talk about how they can help you maximize the utility of the platform or discuss your contract. And you're like, well, I'm using it. It's fine. I don't need to use it more. Thank you very much. It's kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's a good segue, because we also want to get a bit practical with how do you then think about expansion and set it up?
Yeah. No, I mean, I like to work from the top down. So really, if you want to, so the current, net retention rate benchmarks that you want to be gunning for at the very least is to have 105 NRR.
Yeah.
But then the upsell target is also kind of a function of your churn rate. So if you're working in an enterprise company and you have a 7% churn and you want to end up with a 105, that means you need to upsell at least 12% on the base. Then you want to figure out, well, okay, if that's a target, then that gives us basically 12% of the 10 million we have. That means we need to upsell next year 1.2 million. Let's just say that's our goal as a business. Then you want to figure out, is that a viable target? How much have we been selling on base? So the customer base going back 12 months, is there a misalignment between what we need for the NRR to be what we need it to be? Because churn is really hard to change. Upsell is not as hard to change, but it still requires some effort. So I would actually work my way backwards saying, well, for me to hit my NRR number, what would my upsell rate need to be on the current base that I have? And does my historical performance indicate that I can actually do that with the current customer base that I have and or have acquired over the last 12 months?
Yeah.
And with that, then you can at least form an idea of saying, hey, do I now just need to staff against that?
Yeah.
And if the number isn't true, and you are not getting to the, let's just say 12% upsell rate, you only have a 6%, only half of that, then it's a pricing and packaging exercise. It could be a ICP analysis. Do we, which customers are we actually upselling to? Should we be acquiring more of those customers? And then there's a ton of other things that you need to figure out to see, well, how could I bring my upsell rate to the desired goal so that I can end up with the NRR number that I'm supposed to be delivering to the board?
So you also kind of promised that we were going to go through 4 simple reasons expansion isn't happening. And I think we're kind of getting close to that now. So what are some of the reasons you've seen that it just ain't happening?
Yeah. So there's, I think on the fundamental level, it is number one, do you have the right customer set that are using your product? And when they use it successfully, do they happily want to buy more? So are you selling to the right customer types, to the right buyer persona, to the right ICP? So I would figure out if the right ingredients are there. Do I see discrepancies between different regions? Do I see discrepancies between the different verticals that we're servicing and upselling to? So trying to understand if there's a composition problem just even in our customer base. So are we even having the right ingredients to create that, outcome that we actually want? And then at the end of the day, it's also to figure out, well, if we do have the right customer base to sell to, do we have the right things to sell to them? And that means that you inherently need to also look at, well, are there paths that are easily understandable from where people can go from a base value to an additional value that makes sense and can be monetized? And that then takes you all the way back to pricing and packaging on the new biz side, which is where people have obviously come up with this, land and expand concept, and everybody says they do that. Well, fundamentally, they might not want to do some of the things that require, which means that you might have to design a pricing and packaging strategy that on the new biz side actually brings in a lower ACV on the land side. So you're leaving yourself room to actually fill up into the, ACV that you can get them to at the end of the day, but knowing that you'll be actually then closing a higher conversion because you don't have to sell the full value. So you ideally then on the new biz side would have a higher conversion rate. You potentially would have a shorter sales cycle because you don't need to sell that full value. That might also require you to have multiple stakeholders. But that comes then with a shorter sales cycle with lower ACVs, but that is the land and expand. And therefore, that leaves money on the table that can be then extracted, and again, at a quarter or a third of the cost on the post-sale side. So that's kind of, I think, the 2 main things that I'll be looking at is the composition of the base that you're selling to, and do you have the right offering and the right product path? Basically, how can you move them from one value prop to another, or increase in value through using the same value but having more people enjoy that value? And that's kind of those are the 2 major kind of things that I'll be looking at. There's a ton of processes and how do you upsell and who do you upsell to? Are you doing that only at the renewal? Is it intra-contract, upsells? There's a ton of practical stuff we could talk about here, but I think let's keep it sort of to the...
I think at the top level also because it's going to be a case by case, most likely in many cases. But then let's hop back into these 2 points you're kind of hammering on, because you and I spoke, funnily enough, the other day about back when we worked together at this social media management company that Tony and I also worked together in, and you and Tony also worked together in. So we're like one big family with the same history, I guess. There were a subset of customers, agencies, and they were just fundamentally different from the rest, right? They would churn. I think you said their retention was what 60% or something crazy low?
Yeah, it was. I think they had a churn rate of maybe 30% or something like that. And it was a quite sizable part of our base as well. So what the agencies were essentially doing is that they would have clients that needed the agency to manage the social media, and then the agency would buy a platform to manage, that. But then you would also basically working within the life cycle of when they lost a client, they would sometimes let go of the tool. So we were kind of operating in a different way with where normal customers, they would be teams internal to companies who wanted to optimize the social media strategy, and they would buy a tool to do that. And they would have that problem today, tomorrow, and a year after that. So they would have a completely different churn pattern. So when we looked at our churn rate, which was high at the time, we actually then looked at the segment level below. So basically, do we have the right ingredients? And there we found just that one customer segment, aka agencies, and there was a couple of other segments, they just churned way higher, and they basically drove the average down. And then at that point, you really need to make a decision to say, well, we actually have a good retention rate on what you might say is our core ICP, which might not be agencies. But then you can also assess, well, what's our customer acquisition cost of agencies, and are they actually so easy and willing to buy that we're actually happy to have a higher higher churn rate, because on the balance, they come in cheap we lose them a lot, but that's still the math works out, right?
But I think the interesting piece also I reflected over was like, okay, what is the recurring impact? It's like, well, we just need the tool until the customer, churns, and there's no way we're gonna help them actually keep the customer. That's on them ultimately, right? So there's like, you can't really do much in that realm. So giving them a path to expand, really difficult actually to do, because they're gonna say like, well, on average, our customers stick around for 12 months and we have like 3 months left. So I get you want to sell this thing to me, but no, thank you. And I think that maybe goes into the second part you mentioned, which is the path to almost more usage. So it's funny, the software we used to produce this episode, originally it was just, hey, you can upload the audio, it transcribes it, and you can edit the episode, and done, audio only. Then they added video. That was a clear path to expand usage for us. Then they added, okay, if you're recording with guests remotely, we have a studio, and you could kind of keep going with more and more. Do you want to do live? Do you want to do whatever, right? So they have clearly thought about this kind of, hey, there is maybe a starting point, and then as you go, you can expand and get more sophisticated, right? Have you seen anything or worked with anything like this strategically? Because some of it is also very closely tied, quite frankly, to the product roadmap.
What you're speaking actually about is unlocking functionality. So it's not a usage. Yes, you might use the product more, let's just say it like that, but you're actually unlocking functionality. So what, in this case, this product and this company has done is to basically create an a la carte model. So basically saying, what do you need to get started? What is it that's going to solve your base needs here? And it's for you, it's recording podcasts and maybe publishing them. And then you want to, once the series is a little bit more successful, maybe you want to now add video. So your need for that additional functionality comes later in the lifetime of you as a customer. And therefore, them sitting there and pitching that to you on the first day of your contract is actually not helpful. It would drag out the sales cycle. You might see your way to that value, but you might not be ready. There's a bigger sell involved. It just doesn't make sense to maybe sell that to you. So in this case, this is actually a functionality increase. So basically now you're having a product that has functionality that can be sold in bites and chunks. And you try to land on the base value, and then all these additional values can then extract it sort of down the line.
Yeah.
Versus usage-based, that's actually where the value is not in additional functionalities. It's just in you using the product more and or more people on your team also using the product, but for the same functionality. And those are two different things, because that's basically where the increase in the value that you're getting from it is for you using it more. That's the main driver of the value of that. So if you have a single, functionality product, then usage space might be the right thing for you, because the value comes from you using it more. And therefore, as you use it more, that's how pricing should actually increase.
But I think that's also, it can get kind of muddied, because the fact that you then have this product that now lets you also do video might lead to me still doing, using the product more, not just related to video, right? Sometimes they will depend together. When do you think it transitions into being almost multi-product? Because in my head, just as a customer, for me, that's not multi-product. It's the same. It's just extending on my use case almost. How do you see that? Because that's probably one of the other options you also have to expand more.
No, I mean, this is very clearly a multi-product. You just don't see it like that. But that's how they're selling it to you. It's a functionality you want to have that you cannot get with the core product you bought already. So you are buying another product line or an add-on, if you will. The fact that you use it more doesn't bring them more money. If they're not monetizing on the amount of podcasts that you publish, for example, then it's not a usage-based pricing model. So the way that they extract money is that you publish and you do a lot of publishing, I hope, and then you want to possibly buy more functionality, which is the video and all the other things you said. But you using the product more is actually more a churn prevention than it is actually an expansion tool.
Or it would be hey, let's start another show, so we need another seed, and therefore it's more usage, right?
Yeah, usage here being basically seed-based, which also can be the thing, but that both of those can work hand in hand, but typically the scale comes with functionality or it comes with seats and usage. Those are the two main models that you're going to be working with.
Yeah. So you mentioned another interesting one as well, which I think we should talk a little bit about, which is add-ons. How do you think about and go about add-ons to kind of help, drive expansion? Because it's very clear, if you don't have any add-ons, you're not getting any expansion revenue from add-ons, right? So how would you go about that?
Yeah, but I think this is also where people, I think, sometimes get these things confused, that add-ons or different features, or what is it? What's actually the difference, right? And the difference between add-on versus a new functionality or a feature, if you will, is that you need to think about it. Can I sell 3 different features to a customer who has 3 different use cases? And can he buy that feature alone and it does the job that he needs to do with that one feature? Now you can go out to 3 or 4 different buyer personas who have 4 different problems, and you can sell them a product line, if you will, that are of the 4 core products that can operate independently, or they can operate together to give a more holistic use case.
Yeah.
An add-on is only a thing that increases the use case for one product line, but does not operate without you having bought the core product feature. And that's why you need to build out, if you're going to go for the not usage and the seat-based approach, then you need to build out 2 strategies, which is number 1, ideally having a multi-feature set strategy where you can have 4 different use cases service that can be sold independently, because now you can upsell basically now to expand the breadth of the functionality that you want. And you can also take users further down the journey. Let's just say that this is an add-on. You can't buy the video without having the core publishing. That's an add-on strategy to say, how can I drive this person further down the one use case that they have and actually enrich that experience? And that's more of the add-on structure. So it's kind of building a breadth and then depth. Add-on is depth, and breadth is basically new products and or features that can be sold independently.
So the breadth basically means you have multiple tiers?
It could be tiers, but tiers is also usually unlocking additional functionality within the same use case. So it's a little bit different how you slice and dice it, but for me, typically it's a la carte model where, either you do a package and you say, here's the middle package, and you get a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and these 3 features, and then you get a little bit more, and there might be integrations and stuff. Like that's usually how you package stuff. But if you can sell something independently, that's actually where you end up with the a la carte model, where you say, we have these 3 different products. They serve 3 different functions, and there might even be for 3 different types of people inside of or 3 different types of companies for that matter.
Yeah.
And that just opens you up to be a multi-product company. Then you can actually then build on add-ons for each one of those, and you can actually build a much better sort of post-sale environment.
Yeah.
Because if you package stuff together, you're typically then selling them a package that fits their needs, and they basically buy it. And then you have a harder time actually upselling, because now you need to convince them that they actually do need APIs, or they do need more users, or they do need something. But that's a little bit harder to do, to be honest.
Yeah. I saw one common example, at least for the marketing teams out there, is going to be you're going to do a webinar, you need a tool, right? And they have 3 different tiers. Maybe there's some usage based, depending on how many attendees you can have. But then one add-on, which is super common, is custom branding, or removing the software's branding, right? And so if the software is, let's just say, I don't know, $50 a month, then it's like $10 for that. They're like, yep, I'll definitely take that. That's such an easy kind of win to take. There's value for both. But I think what's really important is what you choose to price out on an add-on level. And I think this was maybe Elena Werner, she's over at Growblocks, I believe, who said, well, a good indicator for whether it can be an add-on is if less than 40% of users or customers are using it. Because if you take something that's like, say 95%, that's going to be really tough.
Yeah. No, and I think that's absolutely right. I think you need to figure out what is the use case for 80 to 90% of users. That's the core package. And add-on is basically, to your point, the lesser use feature, because you want the people who value it to pay for it.
Yeah.
And you don't want to bake it into a price point for a core base package for people who don't actually want it, because now you've artificially given them a higher price point for something that they don't value. And therefore it's better sold as an add-on. And on the other side, when you have tiers or packages, what you're essentially trying to do is you're trying to take elements that are essentially add-ons. Let's just take the white labeling. So you want to have your logo, or it could be APIs, or it could be a stronger governance of the platform and who can do what. What you're actually doing is you're self-differentiating companies into SMB, mid-market, and enterprise.
Yeah.
Who cares about governance inside of a platform? Who cares about, hey, we can't have the Rudder logo on our podcast. It needs to be our logo. That's an enterprise. So basically, that's a low value kind of thing. It's an easy thing to add, but it is so important to them that they would pay 4 or 5x for that, because actually they are not price sensitive to that extent, right?
Yeah.
But that customer who is like, that's a nice to have, I might find it cool to have my logo, they're not going to pay 3 times as much, and that's okay.
It's I'll definitely use it.
Yeah. And then it's maybe better as an add-on for the middle package.
Yeah.
but it is included. And that's kind of where you need to also be careful with what add-ons you allow on the different packages. So that's...
But you know what I also like about it is the fact that, let's say only 20% of users or customers use that feature. You might go and say, well, should we even prioritize it? But if those 20% are paying for it, on top, very different conversation all of a sudden. I think that's a very interesting kind of shift that can happen also in the go-to-market and even the leadership team to say, well, actually, it does matter, and we might want to prioritize even building it out because there's revenue tied to it directly, right?
Yeah. But that's also the question of like, when do you also kill features? Like if 10-15% of people are using it, is it actually worth doing? And is it worth supporting? Do we want to build it out?
I could totally see a conversation that goes like, hey, we have this feature blank and only 15% are using it. Can we charge money for it? Would that work out? And then if it's a resounding no, it's like, well, maybe we need to rip it out.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, this will make your product more complex to use.
Yeah.
Every add-on, every additional capability is just another thing for a user to learn. And if they see the button there, they will click on it. If they don't know how to do it, then that's going to be just a worse user experience. So you typically want to strip away everything that either can't be sold, isn't useful to a large part of the base that has bought into that package. And that's kind of the balance between it being an add-on versus should we also just cut it out of the tool. Not everything somebody uses is worth developing and continue to develop.
Yeah. I think another interesting thing we've shared in previous episodes is also like you're going to have, what we're saying here is you have potentially existing features you can price out. It means you don't have to build new stuff, right? You don't have to build new stuff. A very classic thing you can also do is look at your services and support. Particularly, can you give someone, fast track or whatever on support at a on top price for expansion, right? So there's a couple of things you definitely can do.
And I think that's also an interesting angle actually that I see a lot. It's that companies might in some cases actually say that we only put CSM or support on an ARR per customer above 6K or something like that.
Yeah.
They'll just put an artificial line in the sand and say, our gross margin doesn't support us giving those services to customers below that. And I think that fundamentally speaks into a wrong mindset about it, which is services that you're providing that can increase usage, can increase understanding of the product, and can help expand should be applied on what is the potential of that customer and the revenue that they're bringing, not what are they paying me today. So you need to make sure that you're also balancing the resources that you're allocating, not to what customers are paying you, but what is the potential of them being able to pay you. So in many cases, you're under-servicing companies that are in your portfolio who are bang on ICP fit. They just started out with a very low base use case. But if you can work with them and make them successful with that base use case, it's a fairly easy upsell because they're like bang on your ICP. And therefore, you're basically leaving money on the table because now you're giving them under service. They are not seeing the full benefits of the platform, and they're not being serviced in a way that would hopefully increase the likelihood of you upselling to them.
Yeah. Is this the equivalent of almost accidentally stumbling on a land and expand motion?
Yeah, 100%.
So how would you tackle that? If someone is listening now and they go like, hey, actually, that's true. We have all these accounts. They don't get assigned a CSM, but they are a fit. They do have the size and the right person, and they're using it. How do you have that conversation internally? Because I think there's this, what is the rule? Is it 1 million managed per CSM? And then there's a point when it's, sustainable to have someone, you're going to have finance in there going like, you want to do what?
Yeah. No, I think people also get the service cost kind of wrong. They say every CSM demand is 1 million or 2 million or 500,000 or whatever it is. It's actually a function of your gross margin. If you want to have 80% gross margin, and let's just say your server cost and some of the other overhead per customer is 10%, and you want to then allocate another 10% to your CS and let's just say your CS function, just to keep it simple. Well, if they're managing 1 million, you can in theory offer to pay them 100,000 a year. Are you doing that? Probably not. So if you're paying your CSM 50,000 a year, then in theory, you could be profitable or have the gross margin you want by each CSM carrying 500K. So it's actually just a function of your gross margin of how much you want to service on those accounts. But I was more speaking into the fact that a CSM will often help and breed the ground for something that can be upsold later. And when you're looking at that, you should actually be looking at how are the different segments in my customer portfolio performing? How are my different industries? How are my different company sizes? How are my different regional customers actually expanding and contracting? And then you want to find the cohorts of customers that have the highest upsell rate on base. And then irregardless of their ACV, you want to potentially think about applying a CSM and an AM on all the customers that fall within those segments that have the highest upsell rate. So basically, they are the ones that they have basically told you this product resonates a lot with me and I like to buy a lot more of it once I find and unlock that use case. So that's basically how you want to attack the composition of the base. And then your cost of service is something completely different where you're just saying, well, what's the minimal thing I can throw at this to make this account happy and not churn out? And that might be a CSM. And that's a function of your gross margin.
And you know what? I think this is also going to help if whether you're actually in a competitive scenario or not on the new biz side, being able to say, hey, usually people won't give you a CSM when you're only paying this. Yeah. We actually will, because we see your type of business, they're going to expand with us over time because we can deliver on the impact you need. So we're more than happy to give you that additional service, right?
And the value perception will be so much higher. Even though the ticket size doesn't warrant it, they will feel over supported because they're like, oh, I'm only paying $6,000 a year, but I'm getting a full-blown CSM helping me out every single week and every month. So that also leads to a better relationship, but then can be upsold later. So that's how I think about it. It's the composition of the base. Where am I finding the biggest pockets of opportunity? Am I then getting at the end of the day to the 12, 15, whatever upsell rate, so I hit the NR number? Am I deploying the right resources, the account managers and the CS, where I'm optimizing for which accounts are being upsold? That's the whole playbook. I mean, because at the end of the day, then I split the whole customer base that they're managing down into kind of 3 different layers or tiers, if you will. I say there's a set of red customers. They're unhappy. They're not an ICP. So there's a sentiment, there's a usage, there's an ICP fit. And those are in the red zone. And that's where I want the CSM to focus their attention. They need to take care and make those happy and potentially re-implement, find another stakeholder, work through that account set. You have the yellow customers that are potentially on one side or the other, not in the right fit, but using it a lot, potentially happy. So the sentiment is good. I want the CSM to try to bring those into green. And then I want the account manager to work the green accounts. He shouldn't be working the entire book. He should be working the green accounts because you can only upsell to people who are happy using the base product. There's no point in account manager reaching out to people who are in the red, either on the sentiment side, on the usage side, or in the ICP fit side. So that's actually how you want to then distribute the plan of attack, is to say, CSM, you're obviously going to talk to our green customers, but I want you to focus on the yellow and the red. Account manager, I want you to absolutely focus on the green, potentially look at some of the yellow, and that's kind of how you can distribute the workload and kind of figure out where you're applying your resource in the optimal way.
So, I mean, it's funny. We ended up talking about this because you are also doing expansion here at our company. Yeah. So did you get any kind of new ideas that you're gonna, I was gonna say take home, but you're not going home now. I hope you at least got some new ideas also from this.
Yeah.
I mean, it was your knowledge, so probably not.
We've been thinking about this for a while, and for it's functionality. Opening up new functionalities to our customers, that's going to be our best path to deliver more value and then ultimately get more upsell.
Yeah. And if you're interested in what kind of value we deliver, go check us out at growblocks.com. And Ola, thanks so much for subbing in for our lazy, sick CEO.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.